9 books this month. I literally can't believe how many I've actually read. That's crazy. That's actually crazy. Let's talk about them. The first book I actually started reading in June and I finished it the first day of July, and I mentioned it at the end of my June wrap up, so I just wanted to include it here and give you my final thoughts. That's Good Have Gone by Taryn Fisher. This is a psychological thriller. It basically follows Iris, who when she was a teenager she saw her twin sister get kidnapped, and the police didn't really take her seriously and didn't really believe that she had been kidnapped, and the case kind of got dismissed. And now Iris is older, she basically wants to find out what happened, and to do that she's basically tracked down this one guy who she thinks is involved, and he's in a hospital for the criminally insane, so she basically gets a job working there, and it follows her starting this job and everything. This book started off so good. It started off so good. The first half I was absolutely loving, and then the second half just kind of fell flat for me. I feel like the ending was quite predictable, and some of the twists kind of felt like it was a cop-out. I can't really say too much without spoiling it. It's kind of hard for me to rate because I did really enjoy the first half, and I think the ending and the second half just kind of disappointed me a bit. But I ended up giving it 3 stars because I am still glad that I read it, and like I said, really enjoyed the first half of it. But it's definitely not one that I'm going to be thinking about since I put it down. And then the majority of the month, I had one of the best reading months ever, especially at the start. Just book after book was just hitting. It was just hitting different, and I was honestly having the best time. The first one was a new release, and I literally read this on the day of the release. And that's Reckless by Lauren Roberts. I loved this. I loved this. I loved being back with Peyton and Kai. If you don't know anything about this series, this is the second one to Powerless. And this has been a really long awaited book for so many people. And for me, it did not disappoint. I know that this has so many kind of mixed reviews on it. This one basically follows Peyton, who's now on the run after everything that happened, and Kai is now basically hunting her. So we've got very much the hunted hunter dynamic, which I was absolutely loving. And I would say that this one very much focuses more on the sort of romance side of it than the fantasy. I feel like the fantasy kind of plotline was put more in the background, which I actually really liked, because I feel like the whole first book there is so much tension between Peyton and Kai, and all we want through that whole first book is to see them together. And this one, we definitely got that. Literally the whole book was basically following them and having these little scenes together, and their banter was so good in this, and there were some such good scenes in here. I don't really want to say much because I don't want to spoil anything, but just these situations that Lauren Roberts put these characters in is just so good, and literally made me giddy reading it. I do think this is a lot calmer than the first one, but I quite like that because I feel like the third one, everything's going to kick off, and I feel like the third one is where kind of the fantasy plotline is really going to happen. I also think this was still really fast paced, and I just felt like we were going from scene to scene to scene, which really kept the feeling that we were moving forward. I did read it in like 2 days. So maybe that's why I kind of felt like it was fast paced. But I really enjoyed that we got to see so much more of their dynamic together. There is one thing that kind of bothered me, and it was Kit's perspective, but not just his perspective. I felt very much like the ending was so obvious to me after reading Kit's chapters, and I was kind of disappointed with that, because the thing that I absolutely love about the first book is that the ending was such a shock. It literally came out of nowhere, and it was such a cliffhanger. This one does end on a cliffhanger, but I completely saw it coming from about halfway through the book. Whenever a certain thing is mentioned, the first time that that thing is mentioned, I know that this is so vague, but literally from the second that was mentioned, I guessed the ending, and I was kind of disappointed that it kind of took the surprise out of it. And I think maybe if we hadn't had Kit's perspective, it would have been much more of a surprise, or maybe not even taking Kit's perspective out completely, but making it less obvious, in my opinion. So I ended up rating this a 4.5, and I literally can't wait for the third one. I cannot wait, and there's another novella coming as well, which I'm so excited for. I'm so excited. And then I actually went on holiday, and I read 4 books, I think, on holiday. I read 4 and started a 5th one, and I'm so happy with the books that I took on holiday with me, because they just gave me the perfect holiday vibe. The first one that I read when I was away was 7 Summers by Paige Toon, and I adored this book. I absolutely loved it. This basically follows Liv and Finn, and they meet one summer in Cornwall, and they basically make a pact with each other that if they're single, they'll come back every summer and spend the whole summer together. So it basically follows them over these 7 summers, and I just absolutely love this. I loved seeing how they kind of changed and developed each year. I love how this really gave the vibe that they are soulmates and kind of destined to be together, and that's one of my absolute favourite tropes. And we really saw that no matter kind of what life threw at them, they were always brought back together every single summer, and it was almost like no matter what else was going on in their lives, they were always kind of pulled back together, and I loved that. This also took us on a roller coaster. Literally within 100 pages, my jaw was on the floor because something happened that I just did not see coming at all. There are also some twists and turns we take when we're following Liv, some of which when I was reading it I didn't think kind of made sense for her character, but I understand how she got there and how she ended up where she ended up. But this was just a crazy journey from start to finish. I absolutely love Finnegan. He's literally become my new book boyfriend because I'm obsessed with him. I love him, and I loved reading how him and Liv were together, and just their dynamic was so good. And I would honestly highly recommend this, especially for a summer romance read. And if you like romances with a bit more depth to them as well, this is perfect for that. And I rated this 4.5, so another really high rated book. And then I moved on to Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I honestly thought that I was gonna absolutely love this book, and it just didn't click with me. This basically follows a mum and her older daughters who have just come back home because it's set during COVID. And when her mum was basically in her 20s, I think it is, she was an actress and she shared the stage with an actor who's really, really famous now to her daughters. So her daughters have always wanted to know kind of what happened between them and the story of their romance basically. So it follows their mum basically telling them the story of her and this famous actor. And it goes back and forth between the mum telling the story and also what the daughters think and the daughters' questions and interruptions and stuff. And I did really like that setup of this book. I liked how we'd be in the middle of a story and then one of the daughters might be like, wait, but what about this? And it felt very much like we were sat with the daughters listening to this story, and I liked that aspect of it. I think for me, I found this quite slow, and I feel like not that much actually happened. It's very, very character driven. I felt very much like there wasn't really a direction that the plot was going in. And the vibe of this writing and how the story was told, I really, really thought there were going to be some twists that we just wouldn't see coming, but there really wasn't. It was very much a story being told. And the thing that also stood out to me is the romance isn't very romancy. Like the romance that she had with this actor was toxic in a lot of ways, but then also her romance in the present day, who she has this family with, also isn't that sort of book sort of romance, which is absolutely fine because obviously not all relationships are like that. But I think for a story about relationships, there wasn't a lot of that sort of romance that you really look forward to reading in a book. I just found that I wasn't really reaching to pick this up, and I wasn't really, really excited to get back into it. I did consider DNFing it at one point, but I did kind of want to see what happened, and like I said, I really thought there were going to be some twists towards the end, just based on how the story was told. I don't know why, but I do think I probably could have DNF'd it and not really missed out on much now having finished it, and I ended up rating this 2.5. Next I read The Wind in the Willows, and I loved this. This is such a cute book. This is basically a children's book, but the way it's written, because it's kind of old language, it doesn't necessarily read like a children's book. Like I think anybody and everybody should read this book. It was honestly just such a fun read. It basically follows this group of animal characters, and our main ones are a mole and a rat, and they basically strike up a friendship and they go on these little adventures together, and each chapter is basically like a mini adventure, but then there is also kind of a plot and a direction forward between all the chapters and the whole book. But this was literally like Sylvanian families come to life and having their own little stories, and I absolutely loved it. The illustrations in this are stunning. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're one of my favourite parts about the book. Look how stunning that is. And there's also smaller drawings throughout as well. I just absolutely loved it, and I would honestly recommend this to anyone and everyone. It was also so funny. It just made me so happy to read and just honestly made me giggle so much. I rated this 4 stars, and it's some of the most fun I've had reading a book, honestly. And the place that we were staying as well had this big garden and there were bunnies running around, and it was very much in the countryside, and it was literally the perfect place to read this book, and I'm so happy that I took it with me, and I just absolutely loved it, and I honestly want to reread it because it was that good and it was just so cute. And then I moved on to I Wish You Would by Ava DeLaurier. This is another one that I absolutely loved. It's also another one that is perfect for summertime because basically the entire thing is set on a beach. This is a YA romance. It's got the best friends to lovers trope in as well. Basically follows our 2 best friends who are Natalia and Ethan, and they've basically been best friends for as long as they can remember, and they're about to go into their senior year, and as a tradition the year group that are going into the senior year do something called the senior sunrise, and that's basically an overnight stay at a beach where they do activities and they spend the night together basically. And one of these activities is writing a letter basically saying all the stuff you're kind of scared to say or scared to do, or what you would like from the year ahead, and they basically all write kind of their confessions and secrets down, and the idea is that these letters then go into a jar and then they burn them at the end of the night. So they put all these letters in a jar, and some of them accidentally get out. and there's letters kind of on the loose around this beach, and Natalia and Ethan basically have to work together to find and catch the letters before the whole gear group starts reading them and exposing everybody's secrets and everything. But inevitably some of the secrets do get out. Some people get their hands on some letters and start reading them aloud to everybody. Things are uncovered. I really like this. I literally cannot believe that this is her debut book. It's honestly so good, so fast paced, so easy to read. I literally read it in under 24 hours because I was hooked. I literally couldn't put it down, and I absolutely loved their relationship. Literally from page one you could feel the chemistry, you could feel kind of the energy between them, the spark, and you could also just feel how connected they were as best friends, and I absolutely loved that because it just meant that from very early on you felt connected to them as characters and you were kind of rooting for them. This is one that I also annotated because there were just so many good lines in here, and the way that everything was wrapped up at the end, it's just so good. It was so good. I rated it 4 stars, but in my head it's kind of a 4.5, and I don't think I've quite decided yet whether it's a 4 or a 4.5, but it's somewhere there. But I absolutely loved it, and I've definitely thought about these characters since putting this book down. And then I picked up The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. This has been on my TBR for quite a while now. Literally, I think since last autumn, and I've just been waiting to read it in summer just because it really gave me summer vibes. And I read The No Show, which is also by Beth O'Leary, and absolutely loved that. And I was really looking forward to reading another Beth O'Leary book. This one basically follows Addie and her sister, and they're basically on their way to a wedding, and they get into a minor car crash on the way there. And the person driving the other car is Addie's ex-boyfriend, and her ex's car basically gets written off, so they all have to kind of ride together to this wedding. And I really liked the idea of that concept. So this was split into 2 timelines. We have the present, which is them on the way to this wedding, and then we also have the past, which shows how Addie and her ex-boyfriend met and their kind of relationship together, and also what happened and why they're not together anymore. I actually way preferred the past timeline to the present, which I really didn't expect because I thought I'd really like kind of the humour aspect of them all crammed in this car together on the way to this wedding. But I found that the present timeline took some really weird turns, and they maybe weren't necessary all of the time. And the past timeline, I would actually read just that as a book on its own. Like, I think there was enough there to just have that as its own book, and I don't think the present timeline was necessarily really important to the book as a whole, because this is nearly a 500-page book, and I feel like it kind of slowed down when we were in the present. I do really enjoy Beth O'Leary's writing and how she tells the story, and I will definitely be reading more of her books as well. But this one for me was a little bit too long, and like I said, I kind of was trying to get through the present timeline just to get back to the past one, because I much more preferred that story that we were going down, and we just took some really weird turns. So overall I gave this a rating of 3 stars. And then I read The Housemaid is Watching by Frida McFadden, which has been one of my most anticipated reads on my TBR. This is the 3rd one in the Housemaid series, and we're basically following Millie again, who's our main character in the whole series. But this one's set, I think, over a decade on from the 2nd book, and it was so interesting to kind of see Millie in this different situation. She's now married, she's got a house, she's got kids, and I really liked how different it felt to the first 2 because we're seeing her at this different stage of life, and I really liked that. I really like Millie as a character. I think her internal dialogue is so funny and so unhinged at times, and I just really enjoy reading that, even if I don't necessarily agree with what she's thinking. But she's a character that I feel like we get to know really well throughout the whole series, and this is one of those books where you don't really know kind of where the plot is going to go, and the start of it might kind of seem slower paced, even though I kind of think Frida McFadden's writing can never really be slow paced. Just because the way she writes is so addictive to read. But the first kind of half does feel a bit slower, just in terms of it setting things up, and you don't really know kind of where the plot's going to go until you get there. I will say that the twists in this one I did kind of predict and I did guess before they happened, but I don't actually mind that. It didn't make me enjoy it any less, and there were predictions that I was kind of hoping for as well, so I was happy when that is actually what happened. And I also really like how kind of circular this one felt to the first one, especially like the last page. And I ended up rating this one 4 stars. And then I read A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. First of all, I'm obsessed with this cover. I think it's stunning. This one basically follows Eileen, and she essentially gets stuck in her favourite book series, fictional town, and she gets to meet all the characters from that town, and she gets to go sightseeing and see all these places that talked about in the books. And when she's there, she meets a grumpy bookstore owner. This was a really cute book. It's a really nice concept. I think it was slower paced than I thought it was going to be. But I really liked this sort of magical feel to it. I feel like that very much came from the description of the town. It very much felt like we were in a fictional town, which I feel like is kind of hard to do. A fictional town within a fictional book, within a fictional... if that makes any sense. Like, it's a fictional town within a fictional town within a fictional book. But I feel like it would be kind of hard to get that magical realism vibe. But I feel like she did that so well in describing the town, and it just felt so whimsical, and I really liked reading about the town. I also really enjoyed her interactions with these fictional characters, because obviously she knows all of these characters but they don't know her, and I just thought those interactions were so fun to read. But what I will say is this romance didn't feel very much like a sort of giggly, kicking your feet kind of romance, which I feel like that aspect was kind of missing for me reading it. I didn't feel that connected to either one of the characters, and I feel like I really struggled to pinpoint him as a character, because I feel like he was acting different in every single scene and his character didn't feel very cohesive as a whole. And the first half of this book I flew through. I was really enjoying it, and then the second half I found that it just kind of slowed down, and I don't really know what it was about it that I thought was slower paced, but I feel like kind of not that much was actually happening. I do really like the concept of it though, and I'm glad that I read it. I liked kind of seeing how it all played out, and I do really like how Ashley Poston writes and how she tells the story, and I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. And then I read 1,000 Broken Pieces by Tilly Cole. This is the second one to 1,000 Boy Kisses, and this one basically follows Savannah, who is the sister of Poppy from the first book, and we're following Savannah 4 years after the first book, and she's basically sent on this teens trip around the world to basically help her heal from everything that happened in the first book. And while she's on this trip, Kale is also on this trip, and it follows their meeting and a relationship basically forming between these two characters. I really struggled to get through this book. I don't know what it was about it. I just could not sit down to read it. Every single time I tried, I read about 2 pages and I was like, why is it taking so long for me to get through this book? I listened to most of it on Spotify audiobooks, and I'm really glad that I did that, because I'm not gonna lie, if I hadn't had the audiobook, I think I would have DNF'd actually physically reading this. I was just not hooked in any way, and I honestly don't know what it is about it that made me feel like that, because I actually found 1,000 Boy Kisses really easy to read and really fast paced, whereas this one I just did not find that at all. It's very heavy on grief, and I feel like I was expecting that, but I also wasn't expecting it as much as it was, because I feel like we got very little light relief from it. I felt like their relationship was very insta-lovey. I feel like even though they wouldn't necessarily have been in that mindset to even be thinking of each other in that way, but they were. I feel like I kind of expected it to be a bit more slow burn and a bit more them really getting to know each other and kind of helping each other through this situation that they're in, but it was very insta-lovey. Literally the minute they saw each other, even though they're not in that mindset to even be thinking of anybody else like that, they were still having those thoughts, and I just don't think that's necessarily the mindset that they would be in at that time, and that's why it kind of felt very insta-lovey. And I also feel very much like we as readers, but also them as characters, didn't really get to know each other beyond the grief aspect, because I still feel like we don't really know their personality very well, and this is kind of what I mean by it was very grief heavy, because even their dynamic was based on that, instead of them really getting to know each other and then on the side kind of helping each other through everything they were dealing with. And I don't know, I just didn't really believe their story. And the things that I was really looking forward to kind of finding out, especially there's a specific character that I really wanted to find out kind of what happened to them, and we did find out in this, but it was very much overlooked, and it was literally like 2 lines. So I was kind of disappointed with that, because I feel like it could have been mentioned a bit more, even though I know they're not the main character in this book, but I still kind of wanted to see a bit more about that. So I just don't think this book was for me. I ended up rating it 2 stars, and I honestly think I probably would have DNF'd it if the audiobook hadn't been there. So they're all the full books that I read in July. I have started my next one. I have started reading Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, and this is literally 530 page book, which is crazy. But this one will be included in my August wrap up, because I think it's going to take me more than a few days to read this. But they're all the books that I read in July. Book of the month. Book of the month was actually really hard for me to choose, because we had a lot of really high rated ones, especially at the start of the month. But if I had to absolutely choose book of the month, it's gonna have to be Seven Summers by Page 2. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Finn Finnegan lives rent-free in my head, and I just love the whole concept and how we're following over these 7 different summers. And I just like seeing how our main characters change and how life changes, but how they're always brought back together and I love that. And I'm also so glad that I took it with me on holiday as well, because it just makes the perfect summer romance read. And that's a wrap on my July wrap up. I'd absolutely love to know what your favourite book that you read this month was. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I will hopefully see you in my next one.